Today I'm going to show you how to paint this rustic truck. I got the reference photo from Pixabay, and I am using a 16 by 20 inch watercolor canvas. What I have done to prep my canvas is just take some raw umber all the way across it. Once it's still wet, I take a paper towel and wipe any excess off to leave the paint more transparent. And then I went through and sketched on my design with some Carbothello pastel pencils. And I did a light coat of a Krylon finishing spray over the top of that, just so that the pastel pencils don't rub off quite as much and I don't lose my sketch as I'm painting. And then I am using Liquitex Basics paint on a Stay Wet palette paper. If you have the Stay Wet palette, I highly suggest using the actual palette with the sponge on the bottom. It tends to keep your paint moist throughout the painting, and then you can put the lid on top of it as well, and that will save it for any other times that you're wanting to paint if you have to do it in sections. So I will list up on the screen starting from left going to right and down. So taking a look at my reference photo here, I can see that it's fairly dark back in here. It looks like this may be like a covered patio or garage back in here. I'm not going to worry about too much of the detail in this painting. What I'm going to use is a 3/4 mop brush just to get kind of a blurry effect on the background. And I will still include some of the vines that I do see here just to add a little bit more of an element. I am taking this out. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I'm taking all that out, and then you can see there is, you know, some, looks like maybe some metal pieces in here. I don't know if I'll really include all of that, maybe just give it some dimension with some different darker colors back in that area. But I do want this back here fairly dark so that the bright spots on the hood will shine through. Since that is right up next to it, I want to make sure it pops that hood forward and really accentuates the highlights on that. So I'm going to wet my 3/4 mop brush. This is just a fine touch brush. I'm going to wet that and take off any excess water. I just want it slightly damp. And just so I can get my values, I'm going to test it against my paper. I'm going to take some raw umber, some Ultramarine Blue, and I can see that matches really well. So I'm just going to start adding this in, and I'll have to do a couple of coats of this. I'm just using all different directions, all different kinds of strokes. I need to mix up a little bit more of that color. And I'm going to go right over where I'm planning on putting my vines. And this is just a base coat, so I'm not looking at detail at this point. I do want to make sure I maintain my sketch on my truck hood, so I'm going to gently take the edge of my brush and scoop over and follow those lines, and then blend that out so it doesn't look like I outlined it. I'm going to add a little bit more water to my brush. Taking it right up to the edge of the canvas, because I'm going to frame this, but I'm not quite sure how much will cover, how much of the edges will be covered by the frame. So I'm just going to, just on the safe side, I'm just going to take it all the way up to the edge of the canvas. And I want that movement in the background, so that's why I am just kind of sporadically putting this color. You could even add in a little bit of a different shade, maybe some burnt umber in some areas. I'm just looking for coverage on the canvas right. Okay, so that will need to dry, and then we'll do another coat, probably with a different brush, just to give it a little bit more texture and dimension back in that area. So I'm going to rinse my brush. We can go ahead, while that's drying, we can go ahead and add in some of our darker values right here in the front. Underneath the vehicle is pretty dark back in there. You really can't see a whole lot of what's going on. I can't even see the tire area back in here is super dark. So we're just going to mix a nice dark color. Let's see, I'm going to use a flat brush for this. And looks like it is a number 15 Master's Touch flat brush. So I'm going to mix a darker green, I think. So what I'm going to do is take some of this Hooker's green that I have and just add it to what I have, the dark colors that I have going on there. Add some Ultramarine Blue. It is a shadow in there, so I do want to keep it on the cooler side. Some Umber, raw Umber, and maybe just a little bit of black. Just a nice deep color. You don't want to use straight black. Most of my paintings, I don't use anything that's straight black because it can quickly overwhelm and kind of flatten out your painting. So adding or mixing your own black is even best, but adding black to another color just to make it darker helps alleviate that. Okay, so I'm paying attention to my reference photo, and I am just going to do kind of the same technique that we used there and just start putting in this dark color right under this metal border that I have here. So you can see that as this one dries, it is still a little wet, so I'm not going to paint over this just yet. With acrylic paint, you don't want to paint, you want it to either be dry or wet when you paint. You don't want it in between, because what it will do is lift off the layer that you're working on, and then you have a mess and it's really hard to get it to cover back over. So, but as you can see that it's kind of a transparent paint, and the canvas has soaked up the paint. Even though it is a primed canvas, it has soaked up the paint quite a bit. So that's why on watercolor canvases you want to do a few coats to get that real depth and that rich color in there. So I want to let this dry down here as well, so we can start adding in some of our darker areas into our truck. And for that, I'm going to take a smaller flat brush, And this is a number 10 shader brush. It's very flat. I'm going to make sure I wet my brush properly. You don't want it dripping wet. So I do dab a little bit off onto a paper towel. We can start looking at our reference photo and seeing where some of the deepest shadows are going to be. In my reference photo, I can see that in here is some of the deepest shadows. I do have a deep shadow here, but this value is still much darker than this. So let's go ahead and create our deeper shadows right here, and then we can lighten it just a smidge and create these deeper shadows. So we're just going to take a mixture. Let's take a mixture of raw umber and ultramarine blue. And if you're looking to make your own black on your own, this actually makes a really pretty deep black color. So you can see how deep that is. And I'm not looking to match my reference photo completely. I did want to make this a simpler painting. I know the previous painting that I did of the cow, I had to do in parts, and it was a very detailed painting, and so for a beginner it might be a little bit overwhelming. But I wanted to try to do this in one video, hopefully, and be able to show you that it's not quite that difficult. This would be a perfect, easy beginner painting. You can take it to as detailed as you want. You can make it more painterly and leave it the way it is. You know, leave it to where it has some of the brush strokes showing and it's not super fine detail or hyper realistic looking. You can have the option to take it as far as you want. So I'm just going to take some of this deeper color and start filling in where I see on my reference photo some of those darker shades in here, those shadows. And this is just a base, so I'm not going to be too particular. We're not in the detail stage. So I'm just roughly blocking in where I see those darker shadows. And if you're building up a painting all together, as you can see in the cow painting that I did it in sections. I did the background, I did the body, I did the ear, and I didn't touch anything else on the painting until I was completed with that section. And that's one option to do it, or you can do it the way I'm doing it now, and that's just building up your layers all together. And if you're going to do it that way, I have found the easiest way to do that is to establish your values first. So put in your darkest darks first, and that really helps you to be able to see where to go from there, especially if you have a toned canvas. It alleviates the white, and you now have your mid-tone color, which is your toned canvas, and then you'll have your deepest shadows, and then you can put in your brightest brights. And then you know that everywhere in between that, those values need to be darker or lighter than that. So if my darkest shadow is here, I need to make sure that all my values around the vehicle are going to be a lighter value, because I want to maintain this dark value in here. And same goes for the light. If you're painting your brightest white, say up in here it looks like the brightest white, and then I've got some right in here, and I want to make sure all of my highlights around the vehicle are going to be a little bit darker than that. And that's how you really create that depth and that dimension, is by maintaining your values. So I'm just going to continue sketching this in. I'm just using the edge of my brush here and just kind of drawing it in. I'm not looking to be super precise with it. I just want to get this color in. Okay, so we'll take some of that same color, mix up a little bit more. We'll take some of that same color And I'm going to look at, I see there's quite a bit of dark right here in this area, so I'm going to put that in there. Just taking the flat edge of my brush and guiding it along. I'm not looking to make it the perfect shape, I'm just getting that color on, and then I can adjust as I go. Add a little bit more water to my brush, that helps to get a cleaner line, but you have to be careful because it does make the paint more transparent, which is fine for later layers when you're glazing, but if you're trying to get coverage, you'll lose your opaqueness by putting water in it. So in here is fairly dark as well, so I'm going to put the tip of my brush on and just slide just like this. And then I can soften out that line a little bit by just doing a little dabbing and pulling motion. And then that extends this way. Now to that color, I'm going to add more of my umber, my raw umber to that, just to lighten it up a shade. And we can fill in this area now. And I'm going to start on the edge because this is concaved into here. So I'm going to start on the edge and kind of pull out, and that helps to create that shape. I'm going with the shape of the shadow, so I can see in my reference photo here that this is concaved and in here, so I want to pull out this way to get that angle. And then we'll do something similar to this area down here. The shadow isn't quite as long, but I'm still going to use the same technique, just not pull it quite as long. I'm straightening out that top edge. Okay, so let's take a look at our reference photo and see what else is dark in here. And this is just about dry. Looks like add some more water to my brush. Now I want to keep all of my shadows. I don't want to go back into the super dark color just yet. I want to keep them fairly light until I can establish my value for the darkest areas in here and even in here. So this is still just a base coat, but know that once I put another coat over this, it's going to make these shadows even darker. So I want to keep any other shadows that I'm adding now a little bit lighter. So I can see that in here there is a little bit of a shadow, so I'm just going to roughly draw in a shadow. And then up in here is another shadow. And I'm using my pinky to sit down and onto the canvas to stabilize my line. I have found that that usually will help, not always, but it helps to draw a straighter line. Otherwise your arm is just floating in the air and it's bound to shake and move. Which is another positive thing about working with acrylics, is you have the canvas to lean on. When you're working with oils, you would need a stick to rest your hand on because the oil paint will stay wet for so long, you don't want to touch it and mess it. mess it up and spread it around. I'm just looking at my reference photo, trying to establish some values. I am going to take this really dark color that we mixed up here, and there's a board here that I wanted to keep in the photo. I do like the way it looks, and then there's a rope here, but I need to fill this in because this value in here is fairly dark as well. Just feathering that out as it comes out into the sunlight. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to let all of this dry for about 5 minutes, and then we can go ahead and start putting on our second coat. So now I'm going to take a 3/4 flat brush, and I'm going to make sure I dip that in some water. And we're going to work on this area here. Just doing another coat. So I'm going to take some black to that. Maybe some crimson. Some umber. And some ultramarine blue. Just a nice, deep, rich color. And we're just going to do another coat. Wanting to keep my sketch and my outline of my truck hood, so I'm carefully going over my outline, and then I will blend that back into the background so that it doesn't look like I outlined it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take a makeup brush, and I found that these soft blender brushes by e.l.f., they're really soft, but they really help to kind of smooth out brush strokes, and they don't shed like the regular brushes do that you buy from an art supply. So I use the makeup brushes, and I found I really like those better. And this is just going to knock down any of the ridges that I have. When you use a flat brush, sometimes it creates quite a bit of ridges. So this is just kind of knocking that down. And the brush is dry, I didn't wet it. When you're blending, you don't want to wet your brush. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry again. And I may even need to do another coat, we will see, but we can work on the foreground now. So I'm going to take that same flat brush that I was just using, and I'm going to mix up a little bit darker than what we used for the very background up here. I'm going to make it just a little bit darker because it is closer to the viewer. So I'm going to take more black than what I used in the background, and some ultramarine blue. We can even add just a little bit of some green. And we're just going to start doing another coat down here. I'm using the same technique that I used before, where I line up with my sketch and then pull down. And then just kind of loosely put this in. I'm paying attention to my reference photo on this to see where the shadows start. And kind of get an idea of how far they go down. And then most of this over here will be covered with some leaves, but I want some dark color in there so that those nice bright green leaves will show. Then as you come out, you can kind of do some grass-like textures, flipping your brush this way and pulling down. And then as we come down in this area here, I can start adding more green. So I'm going to take a mixture of the two greens that I have, maybe a little bit of that dark color, maybe a little crimson just to tone it down a little bit. You can see that turns it into more of an olive green. And then just start adding in some texture down here. We're not looking at detail, we're just looking at coverage, but while we're doing the coverage, we're just going to add in some texture. Making sure I take that all the way to the canvas edge. And then we can even add a little bit of a lighter green. And maybe some yellow, just to give it some vibrancy since it is in the foreground. Just doing the same thing, just adding texture, kind of a blurry version of some grass blades. This just helps when we go to do our foliage in the front. This helps if the texture is already laid down. And when I say texture, I don't mean texture of the canvas. If you touch it, I don't mean that there's ridges and you'll feel the texture. I mean just visual texture. Just doing all different kinds of brush strokes. A little bit of tapping and pulling, blade-like strokes, sometimes a flat stroke. Take just a little bit more yellow to that, brighten it up just a little bit and add another layer. And my paint underneath is still wet, so it's blending very nicely, and that's what I want because I'm not in the detail stage, so I'm just looking just for that soft texture. Maybe add in just a little bit of some burnt umber to that, just here and there. Okay, so that is a good base for this foreground area. And the other foliage, the bushes that you see here and everything, that will come after we paint the vehicle. That will be one of the last things that we'll paint. So let me check. This feels pretty dry, so I think we can go ahead and start working on that area. So I decided I am going to add a little bit of stuff back in here. I didn't like how just plain it was back here. So what I see in the reference photo, let me pull that a little bit closer so you can see, is there is a little bit of a window here. So I think I am going to go ahead and just softly add that in. And I want to make sure I don't bring that forward too much in focus. So I'm going to take some of this gray-green that I have here, and I think I'm going to kind of deepen that shade and make it just a little bit darker. And I'll test that, and that's still too bright. So I'm going to add some umber, maybe even some ultramarine blue. Just a nice dark color. I do want it to blend in with the background quite a bit. That value is much better. So I'm going to look at my reference photo, and I'm going to come straight down from the hood, and that starts right about in here. And then I can just make a mark on the canvas, and then I can take the edge of the window and bring it this way, and I can see that it starts right about in here. It doesn't have to be exact, I just wanted to get a general idea. So I'm just going to start drawing that on. And it's out of focus, so if it's not straight, that's okay. Because it is not clearly defined in my reference photo. So I want to keep that distorted, blurry background look to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of black to that and just start blending that out into the background. Just want some soft lines. I don't want any hard, distinct lines, because that's what's going to put it in focus. And it's going to be covered up with some of the vines that I see anyways, so if it's a little rickety looking, that's okay too. And then I can see a few, looks like maybe some metal pieces. Grab some more water. Oh, that's too much water. Then there is, looks like a pole here. It's a different shade. It's not, I'm just using this just to sketch it in, and then I'll go back over with a different shade. And then I can see a little bit of what looks like the planks in here. So I'm just gonna slightly draw those in. And then I'm gonna take some yellows here. Didn't rinse my brush, so it's just mixing with the gray that I had on there, which is exactly what I want. And it looks like maybe there's another window here. It's hardly visible, so I'm just barely putting any of that in. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. And then this color here is more of a blue-green. I'm just going to take whatever I have on my brush and just kind of mix it with that color. And this is a little bit more in focus, so I want to be a little bit more careful, but I don't want it perfectly shaped either. So that's not my main focus, isn't the background. Just drawing kind of some wood grain textures. I don't even know if that's wood or if it's metal. It's too difficult to see in the reference photo. And then that seems a little bit too bright, so we'll go ahead and add in a little bit of some black, maybe some ultramarine blue. And if it does get too bright, you can just wait for that to dry, and then you can just go over and glaze over the top of it too. A lot of this down here is going to be covered in some vines. It looks like maybe this window in the back has a bar that comes across here. And then there's quite a bit of green in it as well. I'm not looking to match my reference photo, so I'm just kind of guessing as to the colors I see, and that's perfectly fine for background color. Just lightly touching the canvas just to give it a little bit of color back there. And then, see, the vines are going to come up this way, cover most of that. I do want to add a little black to that color I just mixed. And it's not quite dark enough. I'm drawing some of the detail that I see. rinsing out my brush. And I'm going to go in with some black and some crimson. Maybe some blue, just to cool it down a little bit. I'm going to start straightening up some of my window area. And this is nice and dark in here. And you definitely don't have to do this part at home. You can just make whatever kind of background that you want. I do suggest that if you're looking to accentuate the vehicle, that you make this color, any colors that you use back here, nice and dark, just to help make that pop. In order to have light, you need the dark. So always remember that. If your lights aren't seeming like they're getting light enough, put some dark in the areas surrounding it, and it'll make those look even brighter. So these boards that I have here, I'm just going to kind of glaze over with whatever's left on my brush, some of that dark color. Just adding some movement back in here. The window area, I want to make sure it's nice and dark. I'm going to spray my palette, it's getting a little dry. I live in Arizona and it is beginning of summer, and so that means my paints are going to dry super quick. The winter was really nice, but during the summer they dry in a heartbeat. Okay, so I'm going to add some dark into here, just this window area. Thing over here. Okay, I think what I should do is probably get my vines in here, and then I can decide what I want to do in the background. So I'm going to take a 1/4 inch angle brush. You can see it's fairly small, and that's because the foliage that's back here is really small. But I am going to go ahead and wet the brush, and that is a fairly bright color back there. But I want to tone it down. I don't want it quite so bright just yet. I'll end up adding a little bit of highlights. So I'm going to take the tip of the brush. I don't know if you can see that I have paint loaded on there, so it's a nice sharp tip, and I'm just going to pay attention to my reference photo and kind of map out where I want these, and I'm just doing like little comma strokes almost. So now I'm going to take a 30-0 liner brush. I'm going to make sure I wet that quite a bit. Whenever you're using a liner brush, you want to make sure there's a lot of water. So I'm going to put even some water on my palette. And I'm going to take some of this gray-green color. It really doesn't matter on the color too much. You want to check on your values. I don't want it to be too bright just yet. Making sure I'm getting my mixture right and adding enough water, because as you add the paint, then it dilutes how much water you have in there, and you still want to make sure it's kind of a milky consistency. So I'm just going to pay attention to my reference photo, and I can see that there are some vines going through. I see one that kind of comes up this way, so I'll just go ahead and draw that in. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, if they're kind of squiggly, that helps for branches and things. That's okay to do. So just kind of put those in. If some is a little bit brighter than others, that's perfectly fine too. Maybe the sun is hitting it differently in that area. Can go right over what your leaves that you just painted in. And I'm not pushing hard on the brush at all, just barely a touch, just enough until the paint comes off of the brush. And I'm just doing kind of very sporadic all over wherever I think I want the branches to show. This looks to be very overgrown in this area. And you can vary your colors as well, maybe add more brown into that mixture. Just want it to look like there's definitely some things growing back in here. It's in the background, so you don't need to put it into focus too much by adding too much detail. We can take some of this color and add it to some of the poles, it looks like, or I don't know if those are branches. Can't tell in my reference photo, so I don't want anybody to be able to tell in my painting. So now I'm going to go back to the angle brush that I was using and add in some brighter areas. So I'm going to take some green, some of my really light green, and mix it with some yellow. And then I can even tone it down with some raw sienna or burnt sienna. And I'm just going to add just a few highlights to some of my foliage back in here. Not a lot, just a few areas. Kind of pushes some of those branches back. take some blue and add more of a shadow green color. Maybe some are back in here in the shadows and they're just barely peeking through. Looks like there's even some back in this area. Just wherever you think in your, I'm not copying the reference photo exactly, so it's just about wherever you think you want these colors to kind of pop through. Kind of imagine the foliage in that area and what it would look like when it hits the sun. Don't want anything too uniform. So you can see I added this branch here because I pulled it out a little bit because it was too rounded. It was too uniform for a natural growing vine. It hasn't been trimmed in a while, so making it look like it was trimmed like that really is pulling away from the overgrown effect that I'm going for. You could even, if you wanted to get rid of this whole background, you could do the whole thing in foliage if you wanted. There's no rules as to what you could do. The only thing I would suggest is making sure you keep that nice and dark back in there. If you're going to put foliage, don't overdo it with the highlights because it's going to pull away from the brightness on the hood of the truck, which is your main focal point. Just adding in kind of a golden color up in here, just getting a different variation in colors. Some that are dying, just want some movement back in there. And you can bring it right over the hood of the truck so that way it looks like it continues and you're not going to have a outline like you painted it in sections. Because we're going to paint over the hood anyways, so if it gets into the hood, that's fine. Just doing layer upon layer, giving those leaves more dimension. So now I'm going to go back to my liner brush and start highlighting a few areas on the sticks that I see, or the vines that I see. Just mixing a lighter shade. These look to have a little bit more of a golden tone in them, so I'm just going to keep some of that. Just go over some of the areas that I've already drawn in. some of the branches that I've already painted in. And towards the end of the painting, this might be something that we go back to and adjust after we have the vehicle completed. We could always go back and see if maybe it needs to be toned down a little bit, maybe it was too bright and it's distracting from the truck. Those are all adjustments that you can make in the end too. Just kind of doing some sporadic movements now. Maybe there's some different things going on, not too worried about it. I just want that overgrown effect. Squiggling my brush helps to create some longer vines that are, you know, that they have that characteristic to them, that they kind of have curves and turns to them. And it looks like even there's one that comes this way and then it kind of fades back into here. And then there's another one that overlaps that one. I'm going to add a little bit of black to that. Make sure I have enough water in my brush. Make that just a little bit darker in some areas. And then we can kind of do that to some of the branches that we see back here, just to add another shadow. Kind of makes them a little bit more three-dimensional. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that, and that will be something that we will kind of look over after we've completed the vehicle and see if we need to make any adjustments. Maybe we need to do a glaze over it to tone it down. Maybe we need to bring out a few more highlights in it. Those will all be adjusted after everything here is done. Okay, so I have filled this one in. Now we're just going to continue onto this dark area that I see here. This area, we have this area in here and then a little bit up here. So I'm just going to take some of that dark color. This is primarily the darkest, and then down in here is the darkest. So I do want to lighten that just a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit more umber to that. And that's just going to bring it up just a shade. It's such a slight difference in value, but sometimes that's noticeable. So I'm just going to do the same thing that we did when we laid it down, just trying to be just a little bit more cautious of where exactly I'm putting it. Starting to define things a little bit more. And I'm just fading out some of that shadow area so it's not quite a stark line. And then we're going to do the same thing up here, using my finger onto the canvas to help stabilize my hand. We can add some down here, paying attention to my reference photo, to the layout and the design of it. There is some dark in here, so I'm just going to go through my reference photo and start putting this in. I'm using the corner of my brush for these smaller areas, but I'm just going to start putting this color in anywhere I see it. Just paying attention to my values and making sure I don't make them any darker than the grill area. Now I'm going to add some more dark. I want to go back over the grill area. Adding in another layer so that it will make it a little bit richer in color. In some areas I can see where it's not. In this area I just kind of faded it back, so this I want to keep it on a lighter tone. And then I just went ahead and just kind of whatever was left on my brush, just put it in this area, because this area is going to have some of the foliage in it. And there's not a whole lot of detail that you can see in there from the grates in the grill. So I just wanted to cover that up, and that way when I'm painting I can kind of follow it a little bit better and know that that part is going to be primarily covered. So I don't need to worry about too much of it. Once I get that saturated where I want, then I can go ahead and start moving on to a different area. But I want to keep coming back to this and make sure I get it the depth that I want, the value that I want. I'm going to lighten my value a little bit, adding a little bit of umber to that, raw umber to that, maybe even a little bit of crimson, just to mix it up a little bit. Just starting to put this color in anywhere I see any distinct shadows. And that way when we start painting and filling in the car, we won't lose our shadows completely. The sketch we will most definitely cover, but at least the paint, it will be harder to cover these darker values. And I just want to kind of fade this shadow down so it's not quite a harsh line. I'm just looking at my reference photo, kind of seeing where else I can put this color, and then I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush so that I can get into some of the smaller areas that have shadows. Lightening my value a little bit more by adding a little bit of red to that. As I come up on the hood, there is a shadow from one of the metal pieces that's up here, but it's not quite as dark and prominent as the others, so I want to make sure I change my value for that. I'm going to start rounding this shadow area up with the lighter value that I have on my brush. That's because this area here is like a rounded curved metal piece here, so I want to keep that form by kind of dragging it up in that same direction in the form of the metal there. It's very similar to painting fur. When you're painting fur, if you remember the last video I did, you want to keep your strokes going in the hair growth pattern. Well, you want to do the same thing when you're painting a vehicle or anything that has a curvature to it. You want to go in the same strokes. So if I have this and I'm painting this hood, I don't want to bring my brush straight out this way and then down. That makes a sharp curve. I want to go with the form of it. So I'm going to follow that form and adjust it as I go. So when I come to this side here, I'm going to go around this way and follow that form. If I painted it this way, that's going to flatten everything out. So those are things that you need to pay attention to whenever you're really painting anything that has any form to it or curvature to it. Keep an eye on the direction that it's going, because that'll determine which way you need to hold your brush. Now these slight differences in color, I'm just adding these in just so that I don't lose my sketch and am able to kind of start seeing more dimension. So I'm going to take that same flat brush that I was using, and I'm going to start adding in some of my lighter values now. And we're going to do the same process that we did with the dark, and we're just going to look at our reference photo. I'm cleaning my brush really well if that's what you're hearing. But we're going to look at our reference photo and just follow the same kind of technique that we used for filling all of these in. We're going to look at our lightest values, and from what I can tell, this is our lightest value here. This metal piece here is our lightest value, and then we've also got some up in here in the sky, or in the windshield reflecting from the sky. So I want to get those in, and then we can start doing the medium kind of values in between there and start adding some color to the truck. So same process. I'm going to grab some, let's see, what do I want to use? I want to use some white, some titanium white. And I'm going to do it on a clean spot because I don't want it to mix too much with what I have going on my palette. I think I'm going to take some unbleached titanium white and some of this area here. It may be a little too bright for you to be able to see on the video, but there is a little bit of gold and yellow in here, so I'm going to add some of that, but I want to put some of this on first on my brightest areas so I can see on my reference photo, just following that same kind of technique. We will have to do a few coats of this just like we did with the dark, just to get it bright enough. Paying attention to all of the color shifts that I see, because I don't want to overpower this whole section with too much bright. I'm using the tip of the brush just to kind of carve out where I want that highlight. And then I'm going to put some of this down here. And I'm following on my reference photo the curvature of the light, of the inside of the light. That's what it's reflecting off of. So I'm kind of following that, and that's why I'm doing these sweeping motions, because inside it's like a cone inside there. And then the same thing up here. There's not a lot of this color up in here. Just going to put in a few of the reflections that I do see. And if it does get too bright in some areas, we can always tone over that. So to that I'm going to add a little bit of this golden color, just to bring that tone down just a little bit and shift it, because I do see, like I said, on these metal areas here, there is some gold tones showing through. They're still very bright, but they're on the yellow side. So I'm sure on camera it kind of looks the same shade, but what I'm seeing here is it's a little bit more of a golden yellow tone. I'm going to add a little bit more to that just to deepen it up a little bit, because underneath here is some of that golden color as well, but it's still it's pretty bright. And then in this area, we're going to add a little bit more blue. So because I used some yellow on my brush, I want to go ahead and rinse my brush really well. Otherwise you're going to end up with a green. So I'm going to take some titanium white and a little bit of this cerulean blue. Just want a little bit. I just want to shift the color just a little bit, but keeping it still very light. There's barely a tint to it. And then I need to mix up some more of that because there's quite a bit of that color up in this windshield area that's reflecting. So I'm going to take, it's not quite as bright, but it kind of is. So I'm going to grab some of this blue-green and mix it with that. And I can take my paper and see where my values lie. I can see that's still too bright. So we'll dilute that white a little bit with some more Cerulean Blue, some more blue-green, until I get that value where I want it. And that's just about right. So I'm going to add a little bit of this color in here. Kind of being just splotchy with it because that's the way it shows on my reference photo. It's kind of a gunked over windshield, but because it is glass, it's still going to reflect. And it doesn't have to match the reference photo completely. Just the general idea is fine. You could add different colors. So I tried to adjust some of my settings on my computer as I'm filming because I noticed that all of this was showing up way too bright and you couldn't see any of the blue. So I apologize. I am new to filming. I'm still trying to figure things out and get my camera settings where I want them. Hopefully this will show, I mean, it's not an exact match, but it shows much better than what it was showing. So hopefully that works out better for you guys and you can get a better idea of the colors that I'm using. So I'm grabbing some of this blue that I was using and I'm just going to add a different shade to it. Add a little bit of the Cobalt Blue. Just kind of varying my shades. And this is just a base on this, so if it's not exactly where you want it, that's okay. As long as you've got some variation in there and you're keeping the tones rather light, then you'll be fine. And then same on this side. There's a little bit of the blue in there. Okay, so to that we can add a little bit of yellow because on my reference photo there is some yellow in here. And that's okay if it goes a little on the green side because that's the color that I'm seeing. It does have a little bit of green, so I didn't even bother to rinse my brush. Just gonna start adding this color in. Kind of comes up from the bottom. And then we can take some Sienna to that, or some yellow ochre to that, sorry. And add a little bit of that in. Just varying the colors. does not have to be an exact match. If you're going for hyperrealism, then yes, you would want to take the time to color match all of this and be more deliberate and careful with your strokes, but I'm not. I just wanted to show you guys an easier way to paint where you don't have to be quite so deliberate. You can be a little looser, especially for anyone who's just beginning painting. Sometimes getting those details in can be a little overwhelming. So this painting here allows you to take it as far as you want, detail it as much as you want, or as little as you want. You could make it a really painterly effect and just keep those brush strokes showing and don't add the finer details. This image is a perfect example to do that on. So I'm just going back to my palette, just picking up different colors, making sure I have enough shades in there that I want. I am following the line of the windshield and bringing them down. I may not have done that in the very beginning, but as I'm doing some of my finishing strokes, I want to make sure I follow that line to smooth everything out, to give it the illusion that it is a flat surface and it is reflective. And then up in here is more of like an umber color. It does have a little bit of violet in it, so I'm going to add a little bit of some cobalt blue and some crimson to that. And then just fill in the remaining that I have on the remaining canvas that's showing through on the canvas. I'm just going to fill this in with that color. So now that we have the windshield base coat on, we can go ahead and start adding in some of the blue that we see, the prominent blues that we see. So I'm going to take that same flat brush that I used, the number 10 shader flat brush. I'm going to rinse it out really well. And then I'm going to take some Ultramarine Blue. And most of this back here is kind of dry, so I'm able to put my paint on top of that. I'm going to mix some of that and maybe some Cerulean Blue with it. And even some Umber, just to tone it down a little. And then I'm going to test it. And I can lighten it up a little bit with some white. And that will work. So this is just the base coat for the blue. We're gonna end up adding even some highlights to it. So we're just gonna start filling in wherever we see it. And we want that textured look, so I'm just kind of being sporadic with it, kind of like we did back here. But I am gonna go with the curvature of the hood, or anywhere we put this. I want to make sure I still follow the curvature. So now now that I have that color laid in, I'm gonna go ahead and start adding in different shades of blue where I see them. It's not just one solid blue. You can see it's got lots of different textures and colors in there. So we want to build that up to be able to give it that dimension. So I'm going to start looking at my reference photo and seeing where maybe I see some different kinds of blues, and just following that just like we did with the other color. And we'll just keep building and building until we get it to where we want. Having these different shades in there really gives it that realistic feel. Making sure I always follow the shape of the truck so that I keep that intact. And some areas are a little bit on the green side, so I'm going to add a little green to that. Not quite a true turquoise color, not yet, not for this color, but some of the areas I see, like in here, is blue, but it has a green shade to it. Now I want to start adding in some of this red color that we see, or this kind of rusted color in these areas here, this kind of faded red brick color. So I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm using the same number 10 flat brush. I'm going to take some crimson, add a little bit of umber to that and see what that gives us. Maybe some burnt umber, and even a little bit of black. And this is just the base for this, so we are going to be adding some of the paler reds that we see, but I just want to lay down the base first. So anywhere you see this color, I know that the side is really dark and kind of this color is more prominent in this area. So I'm just going to kind of scrub that in. Just to get some coverage. And once we get all of the canvas covered, then we can start adjusting our detail areas and kind of start adding in the rust textures and things like that. So this is just a process of filling in all of the colors that you see, and this is a perfect painting where you don't have to worry about if your colors mix too much on your brush. You want that color shift, you want those different variations. So right in here, I just pushed my brush down and all the different colors that were loaded into my brush just came out and left a streaky kind of look, and that's kind of how it looks on my reference photo anyways. So you just want to pay attention to your colors and your values and make sure you're getting those correct, and then you can switch to more detailed once all of this canvas area is filled in. So now I'm going to take some burnt umber, and I just want to tone down some of the red. It's a little too vibrant right now and it needs a little bit more of an earthy tone to it. So I'm just going to go through on some of the areas and add more of a rust color to the painting. And just kind of gradually just fill in all those lines that I see in the canvas where the canvas is showing through. I just want to get the canvas covered, and then we can start working on picking out certain areas that are more detailed and start going from there. But right now I just want to get the canvas covered, and I think it's important because it really helps you see which direction to go next. Still varying my colors. I do have quite a bit of water in my brush because I want to just get this canvas covered. I've got quite a bit of texture on my canvas already, so doing it this way is perfectly fine. And this may not be exactly where I see a lot of light blue in this area, but getting it covered first and getting everything filled in first is really going to help me distinguish where I need to adjust different things. We're going to go into the detailed portions now. So I'm going to start, for just so that it's not too overwhelming, I'm going to start with this section up here, and then we'll just kind of work our way down detailing everything. And I will zoom in so that you can see more of what I'm doing and try to walk you through what paints I'm using, because I won't be able to show the palette at the same time. And yeah, we'll get started on that. I'm going to start with the same flat brush that I've been using, the number 10, and I'm going to start up here and start detailing this out. What I noticed I need to do is definitely add in some more highlights to that area. So I'm going to grab some of this green blue, this light green blue that I have, and mix it with just a little bit of the raw umber. And then I'm going to come up here and just start placing this in where I see a similar color. I'm not looking to match the color exactly. And I'm just putting it in along the edge where I see this line kind of coming through. I'm just putting it along the edge and sweeping up. And then I'm going to do the same thing underneath it. And I don't have a lot of water on my brush, and that allows the paint to come off in more of a textured look. It's not quite as clean cut. And then I can add some Naples Yellow to that. And we're on the detail portion, so we are being a little bit more deliberate and controlled with our brush strokes. I'm really paying attention to the details and the color shifting that I see. I'm going to take some burnt umber and just whatever's left on my brush, I'm just kind of mixing it with that. Now I'm going to go into some Ultramarine Blue, and there needs to be some more blue up top. So I'm going to start from the top and then just swoop it down. I'm going to pick up some raw umber and some ultramarine blue. I still haven't washed my brush yet. I'm letting all of those colors kind of mend together. I'm going to readjust this line. And I can see some of this color down in here, so I'm just going to put this in where some of the canvas is showing through a little bit, or the base color that we put on before. Just looking at all those really small color shifts that you see. I'm going to add a little bit of water. I'm going to grab some Cerulean Blue. And add a little bit of that up here. So I've allowed that to dry completely so that I can glaze over it. I'm going to rinse my brush really well. And I'm going to pick up, first I'm going to do some Cadmium Orange with a little bit of the crimson in it. And there's quite a bit of water on my brush. I just want a nice vibrant color to be able to put right in here where I see a little bit more of the orange. I'm going to add a little bit of Cadmium Yellow to that just to brighten it up a little bit. Okay, now we can glaze over this. That looks to be almost a really pale violet. It's similar to what I have on there, but I'm going to add, first I'm going to add some Ultramarine Blue and some Umber. And add in some of the blue that I see. It looks like maybe it's just chippy kind of paint showing through. It's really hard to tell. Okay, now I'm gonna add some white to that mixture and some Cerulean Blue and then a little bit of crimson, just a little bit. Add water to that so that I can make it into a glaze. I'm taking most of the paint off of my brush. And then I'm just going to kind of scrub that around and cover up that color that I have there. We can even add a little bit of this up here. I'm going to add a little white to that. As it comes around this corner, it's a little bit brighter. Okay, and then over on this side is a little bit, it's more of a golden tone. So we can go ahead and add in some Naples Yellow. And some unbleached titanium white. And then since I'm using some opaque colors, I want to make sure I add enough water to my brush. So I'm adding water and then I'm kind of dabbing off any excess paint. I just want a little hint of this color in there. Now I'm going to add some umber, some raw umber. I dipped into it and then I'm just kind of brushing most of it off. And I want to make sure I put some of that back in here. There is hardly any on my brush, so I'm just kind of scrubbing it around where I see it. I'm going to add a little bit over on the other side that we just did. So I did notice that there are some little bolts here. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly just put those in, and then that looks like there used to be a windshield wiper blade here. So I'm just going to put a little dark area there. And I'm going to take need quite a small brush for this. I'm going to take a number 2 round brush. Make sure I have enough water on my brush and just mix a nice dark color. I'm going to take some black, some ultramarine blue, some umber, and I'm going to twirl my brush in my paint to make sure I get a nice point on it. And then I can go ahead and add in this here. Just want the suggestion that there's something there. And then just to the left of that, looks like it kind of comes this way. And we're just painting in just the dark part right now. And then on this side, try to line up where it's at. Right about here. Now I'm going to add some white to that. And just add in some of the highlight. Need more white than that. And then I'm going to add even more white on just a few spots just to kind of brighten it up. Okay. That will work. And then, so I moved my painting or my reference photo over here so that I could start the painting on here. So what I'm going to do, I think, is go back to that flat brush or that angle brush I was using. And then I'm going to mix some brighter blue to put in there. So I'm going to take some Cerulean Blue, a little bit of Umber just to tone it down a little bit, kind of green it out a little. Make sure I have some water on there. And I'm going to add a little white to that. And then just kind of fade that out. And then let's add in some of the highlight area I see. I'm going to clean my brush really well. And I'm just going to add the highlights using a really light color, a little bit of white and Naples Yellow, and then we're going to end up glazing over that. So we're just gonna, it's gonna be too bright to begin with, and that's okay because we're gonna glaze right over that. Now that this has all dried, I'm going to go ahead and glaze over the top of that. And I'm going to stick with that same brush I was using. And I'm going to grab some, let's grab some orange. And a little bit of cadmium yellow. And I wipe most of it off of my brush so that there is a lot of water in it, but I did wipe most of it off of my brush. And we're just going to kind of go over some of the spots that I see that have some orange yellow in them. So now I'm going to mix up some, almost like this pinkish color that's here. You could do this to where you glaze over, you painted all this and texturized it with some white, and then you can glaze over it with some pink, but I'm just going to skip that step and try just mixing it and putting it on where I see it. Hopefully that will still give me the same effect that I'm looking for. So I'm mixing some crimson, some titanium white, and just a little bit of some raw umber. My brush is fairly dry and I'm barely touching the canvas. I'm just kind of letting the paint pick itself off of the brush as I go over. I don't want to cover up all of the dark that I have. I still want some of that to show through, so I'm leaving some dark areas, and that will just help give it more depth. As my paint runs off of the brush, I am pushing harder. It's when I go and pick up new paint onto my brush, I'm going to have a softer touch. I'm going to add some Cadmium Orange to that, just to vary my shades a little bit. I added a little bit of Cadmium Yellow just to give it a little bit more vibrancy in some of the areas. I don't want this color all over. I don't want it to overpower it, but I feel like it needs it in some of the other areas so it doesn't look too washed out. Now I'm going to go into some blue and start working on some of my bluer areas and trying to blend these transition areas a little bit better. So I'm going to take some Cerulean Blue, a little bit of some raw umber. Raw umber will kind of green out the blue a little, and for this, that works. I'm going to use the same kind of technique where I'm just letting the paint kind of come off of the brush. Okay. So I am almost satisfied with the hood of the truck. I'm going to add a little bit of white with some crimson, just a little bit of crimson, just enough to tone it to a very pale pink. And I'm just going to add this in a few areas. I dipped my finger in some water and was able to kind of smear that out. I didn't like how harsh that line was right there. As long as you catch it just in time, you can always use that technique. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that, at least for now. And I do see, looks like in the hood there is some darker line. So I'm going to add some umber and some black before I move on to the rest of the painting. So I'm going to mix the same shade that I was just using for those spots. Just add a little bit more water to that. Get most of the excess off. And I'm just going to take the tip of my brush and just kind of straighten that out and smooth it out. I'm going to add a little bit to whatever mixture's on my brush. I'm just going to add a little bit of the unbleached titanium white to that, just to add a little highlight on top of here. Okay, so I will go ahead and continue painting the rest of the truck just as we did with this up here. I'm just working on just the metal portions of the truck. I'll stop and show you all how I do these sections and the headlights and the grates here. So I've laid the base, or not the base, most of the details for the truck area. I still need to do some of the embellishing details, like in the lights here and the emblem on the hood, and then also do some work on the grill. But what I wanted to do first was get in my foliage in the front, because I don't want to add any detail that's just going to be covered up by the foliage. So I did a quick sketch with a pastel pencil and just kind of a general idea. I'm going to add a little bit more leaves than what I sketched in, but I wanted to get the general layout. And now I'm going to go ahead and start filling in those leaves, not detailing them completely, because I am still going to do some work on the background, but I want to get that base colors in for that. So I'm going to use a number 6 shader flat brush, and I'm going to start picking out, let's go for some hooker's green, some yellow ochre. I just want a similar color, not looking to match it exactly since this is just a base. And I'm adding a little bit of black to that so I can get the coverage that I want. And I'm just going to go in and start filling these in. You don't have to put the foliage in the front. I just liked it, so I'm going to stick with keeping it. But you could do just maybe some grass leaves coming, or blades coming up. You could do some nice colorful flowers in the front. You could leave this just short grass in this area. Whatever, you know, you decide what you want to do to that. I'm going to stick with the reference photo that I have. I liked the composition of that, so I'm going to stick with that. So I'm just following the shapes that I have. I'm not looking to be too detailed in this first stage. Just going to go through and start filling all of this in. I'm not looking to cover my pastel pencil completely either. That's always something that I can take a damp rag and just wipe off at the very end if it's not completely covered. And you can most definitely just draw these in with the brush too if that's easier. And you want to skip the step of drawing it out first. You can definitely do that. Just pay attention to your shapes if you're going to freehand it like that. Just pay attention to your shapes so that you get the correct leaf for whatever plant this is. Now I'm going to take my my 1/4 inch angle shader, and I'm going to start working on this area here. So I see a lot of blue in that area, so I am going to grab some Cerulean Blue and some light blue, and I'm just going to start detailing this. Just kind of adding it, little dabbing motions, different textures in there. Wherever I see some of this color, I'm just going to pop that in. We can add a little titanium white to that. And I'm not pushing hard. I am just barely touching the canvas, letting the paint kind of slide off. Just want to add a little highlight to that blue. Okay, now we can rinse our brush since we're going to be going to a yellow. I want to rinse my brush. We'll take some Cadmium Yellow and some Naples Yellow, some Titanium White, and we're just going to start adding in some different textures. Just being random with my strokes, just kind of letting the paintbrush do its texture. I don't want to cover up all the dark that I put in already. Add a little yellow ochre to that, and maybe some umber. Can add a little umber to the blue areas just to give it a little bit more depth. And then along the side here, I can add some more umber. Kind of doing a comma stroke just to kind of give it some texture right there. Now I'm going to clean my brush and we'll go into, we'll make a lighter blue gray. So to that blue mixture that I have, I'm going to add some black, some white, more white, that's not quite enough. And then we're going to start up here. Add some of this color to this, what looks like maybe it's a hitch or something. All I'm doing is trying to get all these different textures and kind of blend and merge these colors all together. Okay, so that I think I'm happy with. I will do some final highlights on that, but what I like to let the paint do is kind of dry so I can see what shade it's going to dry to, and then I can add my final highlights on top of that. So let's work on this area here, and I'm going to go back to that angle brush that I was using. And this is just the same concept that we did here. We're going to follow that all the way through down here. So I will go ahead and fast forward through that and stop when I get to doing the headlights. So I went ahead and detailed this out. Now I'm going to work on this area back in here. And I'm going to take for this, let's do a 1/2 inch angle brush. And I want some of this light color here because that's showing the direction of the light. So I'm just going to take some of this blue-gray mixture that I already have mixed up on my brush. And I don't want too much detail back here, so I'm not going to worry about all the wood grain detail and making sure it's in the right place. Just want the general idea. I can see some of my canvas showing through, or when we prime the canvas with the raw umber, I can see some of that showing through, so I want to make sure I cover all that up. And then I will go back over my hood in this area and bring that back forward So if I get a little on the truck, that's fine. So then I'm going to grab a little bit more black. A little bit of the blue, just to add a different shade in there. And I'm going to go right over my leaf that I drew. I just wanted those for placement. And then I'm going to take even more black to that, some blue. Fix this shadow in here. And as it comes out, I can add more blue to that. And then go back to the gray mixture that we mixed up. Looks like there's another board. It's not quite as bright as the other one. And then the same over here on this side. We can add in a little bit warmer color into this up here. Add in some more dark. We can even take the rake brush, or even a fan brush would work too. So I'm going to take the 3/8 inch rake brush, and I'm going to make sure I have quite a bit of water on my brush. We're going to mix up a light shade. And just add in some of those highlights back in. And we can darken that a little bit as we come down this way. And I'm not pushing very hard. Some areas get a little bit brighter than others. That's okay because it is wood. And grab a little bit darker color, a little bit on the top. You can add add just a little indication of some of it down here. And that's it. That's it. So now we have the ropes right there that we can go ahead and do. For that, I am going to use a round brush. I'm going to pick up the number 2 round brush. And let's see. It's kind of a similar color, but I do want to mix that up a little bit. I don't want it to be the exact shade of the wood in the background, so I can add a little white to that. Add some water to our brush. I do have some of the shadow areas already put in, so that's going to help determine where these need to go. Just add in some dark in the shadow area here, then we can kind of blend that out. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now we need to clean up the edge of our truck right in this area here. So I'm going to go back to my flat brush or my angle brush, the 1/2 inch angle, and let's do some blue on this side. A little bit of the umber. And then we're just going to line it up and pull down. Can go right over the leaf. We're still going to go back over the leaves, so you can go right over the leaf. Just want a nice, clean, sharp line there. And then we can take some red, add it to that mixture, add some umber, just blend the red right into the blue. And then we'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. Blend that out. And I'm going to grab some darker, add more umber, maybe a little bit of blue. I feel like that's a little too bright right there, so I'm going to tone that down a little bit. And then we can add just a little bit of a highlight. Just a small amount. Okay, I think I am happy with that. while we have this on our brush, we can just spread some of this around. Okay, so now we need to put in our headlights. So we will start with this one. We need to make sure that's dry first. We will start with this one. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my number 2 round. And we can start adding in a little bit of the highlight areas, and then we can start defining some of the more shadowed areas. So I'm going to work on this area here. I'm just going to kind of loosely put these in. We're going to straighten them out and retouch them when we add our shadows. You do want to try to keep them in a circular pattern and keep the roundness about the same all the way around. As we come around, it gets a little bit more on the red side. I'm going to take a darker color and start to straighten that out. we can outline this circle where I'm not sure how headlights work, or these ones anyways, so, but I do see that there's a dark circle on the outside, so I can go ahead and put that in. And then there's a little bit of dark on this side. Okay, so now let's start adding in some of the inside. There is some green, so I do want to add some green and put that in there. I believe that's just the reflection that I'm seeing. But that's primarily in this area here. Adding a little blue to that just to get a little bit darker shade in. And then it kind of feathers out. Grab some yellow ochre. I see more of that towards this area here. And then we can grab, just wipe off what's on our brush, grab some blue. And this is a fairly straight line that comes across here. This looks like maybe it's a reflection of some distant trees. Not quite sure. And then we'll take a little bit of this blue here, add some variation in there. A little bit over here, and then there's some over here that kind of curves. And then we're going to pick up some of this gray. And then it gets a little bit darker. Has a little bit of blue in it. And then it actually comes into some ochre color. So let's add some of that down here. And we can take a lighter blue. We'll just add a little bit of that in this transition area here. And then we'll take some white. I'm not worrying about rinsing my brush. It'll just mix with whatever's on my brush. I did wipe it off a little bit. I'm just going to kind of feather that around. Just to give it a little bit more brightness. We'll take some of this Ultramarine Blue, just straight blue, and I'm just going to put that kind of glaze over the bright color that we have, the light color that we just put on. Just taking a little bit, just want to scrub it in a little. And then let's fill in our line here. The inside it looks to be more of a rust color, so I'm going to add some of that, add some black to that just to give it a little bit more coverage. Pick up some blue and some black. Readjust some of these lines that we put in here. Lost a little bit of it. Take some of that same dark color. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the brown that I already mixed up. And we have these lines or cracks or reflections. I'm not sure what they are, but I'm just going to put those in. And then there is a crack in the glass here, so kind of comes around this way. we will rinse our brush with some of the water that's already on there, and I'm just going to kind of fade some of that out. And then we can take some of the light color and just add a little bit of a highlight to that. That kind of pops it out and makes it look like it is a crack. We can take a little bit of this blue, wiped a lot of it off. I'm just going to kind of fade that out. It's a little bit too much of a harsh line, so I'm just going to kind of fade that. And I do need to, on this outside here, it's a little too wide, so I'm going to take some black, some umber, I'm just going to readjust that. Okay, so I am happy with that for now. I will add in a little bit, actually we can go ahead and do that now. And then when I go and do this one, I will just fast forward so that it's kind of the same concept as this one. We'll just add in some of these shadows down here. And you can mess with it as much as you want. You can, you know, stencil it and make sure your shape is perfectly correct, but I'm really not too concerned about it. If it bothers me too much, then I'll go ahead and try to rework it, but I think for now it's okay. Just adding in some of these darker values that I see up underneath here. Just kind of scrubbing it in. I don't want a super harsh line because it is a shadow, so it is going to gradually kind of fade out. Okay, I think that's good, and so I'm going to go ahead and detail this that you can't see currently. This one right here, and then I will show you how I detail the rest of it. So I went in and started detailing some stuff and my camera was not rolling apparently. So let me just explain what I did. I just went through and detailed this, just doing kind of the same techniques of just layering the paint on, making it kind of chippy and rusty. And then I went and detailed this. I did these bolts down here, and then I did this over here as well. And I started working on some of the grates here before I realized my camera was no longer rolling. So I'll just start finishing this up. I do want to do just probably these couple here and then these back here, and then I want to fill this in and start working on the foliage and really get that detailed, because I'm thinking I want a little bit more coverage in this back area back here. So before I waste my time and just detail all of this, I want to go ahead and we'll do this first and then we'll work on the foliage. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that and pretty much the rest of the painting. What I do want to do is do the foliage now, and then we can add in our brightest brights and our darkest darks at the end of the painting. So for foliage, I think I'm going to use the same brush. We'll try this one and see if it works, the number 6 flat. And so I'm going to start up here at the top, and I think I'm going to work my way down, because it seems like down in here it's a little bit more on the blue side. It's a little more shaded here, and these are brighter colors really hitting the sunlight there. So I'm going to grab some bright green. And maybe just a touch of that, just to kind of earth it down a little bit. And then for this, I'm not really gonna, for my leaves and stuff, I'm really not gonna paint in every single leaf that I see. I'm just gonna kind of go with what I think they would look like. Use, you know, your artistic license and put your own spin on it. And I'm not adding a lot of pressure to the canvas. I'm just barely touching and letting it kind of scumble off of it. Vary your colors as you go. Not every leaf is gonna have the exact same shades on it. Now that this is dried, we're going to add a more vibrant green. I added to my palette some of the light green permanent right in here, and I think I'm going to try to incorporate some of that. I need to spray my palette, and then I'm going to go back to that flat brush that I was using, the number 6, and add some water because we're gonna glaze over it, so we want to add a little water to that. And this may or may not be the color I'm looking for. We're just gonna kind of wing it and see how it goes. Sometimes that's what painting is. So that, I think that's similar to what the color that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna go ahead and start glazing this over. Not over the ones in the background. I just want the ones that I put some highlights on. Just want to add that variation and that brightness. Okay, so I think I'm happier with that. Now we need to go in and start adding in a little bit darker values. I think I'm going to stick to that number 6 flat brush. I'm going to take some of that green that we were using Let's add some blue to that. We're just going to kind of glaze over almost. I'm wiping most of it out of my brush so I don't have So I'm just kind of going on where the tip of the tread starts to come out. You can kind of see that on the reference photo here, where the tip of the tread kind of comes out. I'm just going through and putting on just a suggestion of some highlight in that area. All right, so I had to fix my camera, adjust my brightness settings on there so that you can see what I'm seeing. I'm going to use a 5/8 flat brush to put in some of this lighter grass texture. And I'm going to be fairly loose with this because I want that movement. I don't want it to be just straight up sticks of blades of grass. I want some kind of laying down, some going all over. So I'm going to be a little bit dramatic with it, I guess. So I'm just mixing, I'm just grabbing some color, some of the green, some of the yellow ochre, just getting a mixture on my brush. You can double load if you want. And I think I'm just going to go in and start using some of the sharper ends of my brush creating different strokes, laying some flat, some can come over the bumper. Mix up your colors, vary your colors. We just want some motion back in there. We can add a little blue for back in here. Maybe there's a little bit showing from that. Underneath the truck, maybe the sun is kind of showing it, but we're going to add blue because that's defining that shadow area down there. Go back to our brighter colors, just grab a mixture. I have a few different colors on my brush, and I am just going to start adding in different textures, different colors. Do as much or as little of this as you want. I really just want, I want the focus to be on the truck, so I don't want to do anything that's going to distract the viewer from that. We worked really hard to get all that detail in there, so distracting the viewer from that detail is defeating the purpose. So think of it that way. Just adding in all kinds of layers. Go back to some more blue, cool that down so I can put a little bit back in here. Now I can grab an even darker color. I'll just mix a nice dark color and start adding in a little bit of a shadow on some of this grass here. Just give it a little bit more texture. And if you get a leaf or a blade of grass that you just are not happy with, you just paint right over it. Grab some dark and put it over it. Okay, so now I'm going to start adding in a few longer, thinner blades of grass. So I'm going to take the 30-0 liner brush, pick up some light color here, can make that a little bit brighter. I've been painting all day, so I've had to continually add fresh color to my palette. So if you see me scraping the top layer off of my paint, that's why. So I'm just going to make sure I have enough water on my paint that I want to use. You want it to be kind of a milk-like consistency so that it flows and you get a nice thin line. And I'm going to twirl my brush and let it come to a nice chiseled point. And this will hopefully give us some thinner blades of grass, but I don't want to push hard. We're just softly touching the canvas, letting it come off. Can add a little different color to that just to mix it up, but make sure you add more water because it is going to thicken it up. Roll your brush again, pull down at the same time, and that kind of takes off any excess paint. So let's see, where do we want these ones? Let's pull them, let's do some longer ones. And the harder you push with your liner brush, the thicker the line is going to be, so make sure you keep that in mind. Do some that are kind of flopping the other way and maybe laying down a little. Just want that dimension. We can even do a little bit more of the red tone to it. Make sure we add enough water. Another texture that I used in the cow painting in the background was to kind of flick the brush. So I just go ahead and flick it to the canvas, and I'm barely touching the canvas, but what that does is creates these little like textures, like there's a different kind of leaf or weed there. You can attach a stem to that. Now that wasn't super difficult. Don't go crazy with the detail in the foreground unless that's what you're going for and you just want your entire painting to be detailed. You don't have to worry about the foreground. Let's just focus on getting this detailed. What we're going to do though is to some of these blades of grass here or weeds or whatever they are, I'm just going to add a little white to my mixture and we're just going to sparkle those up a little. Now this I'm being a little bit more deliberate with where I'm going to put this, except I have too much water in my brush. And I'm just going to kind of toss some sparkle on those, just to bring out just some of the tips of the grass. don't do it to the entire stroke, the entire leaf or the entire stem stroke. Just wherever the sun's going to kind of hit it. I wanted that one to stand out a little bit more. It was blending in too much with the background, so just going to add a little more highlight in some areas. And it's that easy. In my reference photo, I have some different colored flowers in here. I'm not going to put those in, but if you were going to put those in, they're fairly simple to do. I will hopefully do another video where I'm doing just landscape, and then we won't have to, then we can just focus on trees and foliage and distance and perspective. But for these beginning videos, I really just wanted to show everybody how to detail everything out. And I really, for this video, I was really hoping to make it beginner friendly, which it definitely, you could definitely as a beginner still attempt it, absolutely. But I was trying to make it not so detailed, and I found out about myself that I can't do that. I really struggle with not adding a detail because that's one of my favorite parts. But I am going to try to do some landscapes where maybe they aren't quite as detailed. This was probably a bad choice on my part for making it not so detailed. So just keep in mind that I will do some that are beginner friendly that aren't quite as detailed and don't take quite as much time. I do plan on doing some of those. So I just picked up some light color, and I'm just doing the same thing that I did to the blades of grass down here. I'm just kind of sparkling up a few areas where I think it would look good. I mean, I'm not really looking at my reference photo for any of this, just kind of adding a little bit of sparkle here and there. So we can also take this and add a little sparkle to some of our leaves. So in the comments below, I would really love to hear whether you like these really long videos, even if it has to take a couple parts to the video, or if you prefer doing maybe more time-lapse versions and with some real time put in between, and maybe the video is only about 2 hours long. But I can't promise that I would do a lot of shorter videos that don't have as much detail, just because that's me. I just love painting the detail part. But I do plan on doing some more beginner videos that you can take as far as you like. But I would like to know whether you guys like the longer videos, even if it means that I do them in sections or parts, or if you'd like to watch the full thing in one video that is either a super long video, or if you would rather do a video that has partly time-lapsed and partly real-time. So let me know what you guys prefer. I am just starting out my channel, so I would love all the feedback, whether it's negative or positive. I would love all the feedback I can get. All right, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. Let me know what you guys think. I may add a few more details here and there, but it wouldn't be anything that you hadn't already seen me do with the truck or with when I worked on the foliage here. It would be the same techniques. Let me know. Please like and subscribe, comment, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon, and stay tuned for next week's video.